All right, so the next thing that we're looking at is solving quadratics with the quadratic formula. So we talked about solving quadratics before, right? And we talked about how the key thing about solving a quadratic is that it finds the points where you cross the x-axis, which is really useful when you have things that go up and come down, or a lot of times when you want to find some other key features of graphs. Okay, so we're still working on solving, but here's the thing. Not all quadratics will factor. Some of them just don't. And sometimes you're going to get answers where maybe you're going to get like a decimal. Like maybe it doesn't start at -3. Maybe it starts at like -3.259368725513, right? And solving by factoring isn't going to help you get that answer. So what this is it's a different way of solving using something called the quadratic formula. Okay, now there is a way that you can get this equation using something called completing the square. All right, it's kind of beyond the scope of this course. So for right now, just trust me that this thing works, okay? And basically what this is you use it when you can't factor a quadratic or if it's just really, really hard to factor. This is a method that always works. So you can always use this to solve a quadratic, whereas you can't always factor. But I think using the quadratic formula is sometimes a lot more work than factoring. So factoring can be easier when that's an option to do. But when you can't do it, this is a method that'll work for you, okay? When you solve with the quadratic formula, you can have one solution or two solutions or no solutions, okay? And that should kind of make sense because, again, we're looking for those points where your quadratic, your parabola, crosses the x-axis, right? Well, think about it. I could have a parabola that comes down and bounces off the x-axis and then keeps going. That would be one solution. Or I could have a parabola that comes down and crosses and then goes back up, right? This would have two solutions. Or I could have a parabola that doesn't cross at all. Maybe it just is up here, right? And then it never crosses the x-axis. That's when you're going to have no solutions. So this one you'd have one solution, this one you'd have two, and this one you'd have no solution. Okay? So that's the three different kinds of solutions that you're going to get. All right, now this is going to look kind of complicated, but it's not so bad. Okay? So this is the generic form of your equation. A is always going to be the number in front of your x squared. B is the number in front of your x. And C is the number that doesn't have an x. Okay, and we're going to take those numbers and we're going to just plug it into this formula wherever they go. Okay, so let's take a look at this first guy here. So in this first equation, there's a little invisible 1 here, right? So this is a 1x squared plus 3x minus 4. So that means that A is going to be 1, because that's the number in front of x squared. B is going to be 3, because that's the number in front of x. And C is going to be -4. You got to keep that sign with it. Okay, so C is -4. So I've got A from the thing in front of x. A in front of x squared, B in front of x, and then C is the number without an x. Okay, and now that we know these numbers, all I'm going to do is I'm going to plug them into this equation. So I'm just going to make my way through here really slowly. So it starts x equals, because we're solving for x. All right. This guy right here, so it looks like it's a negative sign. Think of this like it's the opposite. Okay, you always do the opposite sign. So right now I've got a +3 for B, so it's going to become a -3. But if it were already a negative number, then it would become positive. So it's always the opposite. Okay, and then next we have this funky little symbol right here that you might not have ever seen before. See how it kind of looks like a plus sign on top of a minus sign? That's because that's exactly what it is, okay? So what this stands for is it stands for plus or minus. It could be either one. Okay, so when you do this problem, basically what happens is that if you were going to actually solve this, right, there's actually two different ways that you can get your solutions, to get those two solutions we can have. One of them is this big equation with a plus sign. One of them is the big equation with a minus sign. And rather than doing all of that work out twice, we just kind of say, well, we'll keep writing plus or minus everywhere until we get to the last step, and then we'll split it up. Okay, so that's for plus or minus. Okay, so here's my plus or minus. Then I got this big square root symbol. Okay, and inside of that, I'm going to have b squared. B is 3, so that's going to be 3 squared. Watson, the mailman is coming by. Watson's very upset about it. And then we got -4 times A, well, A is 1, times C is negative 4. Okay, and then that's all of it divided by 2 times A. Well, A is 1. Okay, so that's just all I did was I just rewrote that equation, but I put the letters, instead of letters, I put the numbers. Okay, now we're going to simplify this. And when I do my simplifying, there are 3 things that I'm going to do all at the same time here. Okay, so I'm going to do all in the same step, 3 different things. 1 is I'm going to square this. 2, I'm going to multiply this stuff together. And 3, I'm going to multiply this stuff together. Okay, so I'm going to do this, all 3 of these things all in the same step. Okay, so I'm still going to have x equals negative 3, still my plus or minus. And then inside here, 3 squared is 9. And then I'm thinking of this as negative 4, even though it's a minus 4, I'm thinking of it like a negative 4 times 1 times negative 4. Okay, well, negative 4 times 1, that just stays the same. So then I have negative 4 times negative 4, that's positive 16. Remember your multiplication division bear? He's squinty, right? So the 2 minuses make a mouth, the plus sign. And then on the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. Great. Okay, now I'm going to add these 2 guys together. Okay, so I'm going to have x equals negative 3 plus or minus 9 plus 16 is 25 divided by 2. Okay, and then I can take the square root of 25. So I'm going to have x equals negative 3 plus or minus, well, what number times itself equals 25? 5 over 2. Okay, and now here's the point where we've got to deal with this plus or minus. Okay, so now what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to now take this, I'm going to break it into 2 different problems. One of them is going to be negative 3 plus 5 over 2. And the other one's going to be negative 3 minus 5 over 2. Okay, so negative 3 plus 5, well, negative 3 plus 5 is 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So there's one of my answers. Over here, negative 3 minus 5, that's negative 8. And negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. That's my other answer. Okay, so this is an example where if I was looking at my parabola crosses at negative 4 and positive 1. Okay, and those are my solutions. All right, now you're looking at that and you're going, oh my gosh, Ms. King, that was so much work. It is, it's a lot of steps. And that's why I say that factoring is easier and faster if you can factor something. But this really isn't too bad, right? We plugged in a bunch of numbers and then we just had to do a little bit of math. Like the steps aren't hard, even though there's a lot of them. Okay, so this is totally going to be doable for you. So let's look at the next one. So in this one, I'm going to start by figuring out what A, B, and C are. So A is the number in front of x squared, so that's a 2. B is the number in front of the x, and again, you got to keep the sign with it, so it's going to be a negative 4. And then C is the number that's by itself. That's a negative 3. All right, and now I'm going to plug it into this big old equation up here. So it starts x equals, and then remember we said this isn't negative b, it's the opposite of b. So instead of being a negative 4, we're taking the opposite of that. That's going to be a positive 4. So you're not always going to end up with a negative number there, even though there's a minus sign, okay? So positive 4, then our plus or minus, then my big square root, then I'm going to have b squared, and I'm going to put that in parentheses just so that it shows the negative goes with it. And then minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 3. Okay, and then the whole thing is over 2 times a. Well, a is 2. Great. Okay, so now I'm going to do those 3 steps all at the same time to simplify this. So I'm going to square this guy. I'm going to multiply these guys together. I'm going to multiply these guys together. Okay, so I'm going to do that all at the same time. So I'm going to get x equals 4 plus or minus. And then inside my square root, negative 4 squared, that's negative 4 times negative 4. That's going to be a positive 16. Okay, anytime you square a number, you should end up with a positive number. Okay, and then here, again, even though it's a minus, I'm thinking of it as like a negative. So negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And then negative 8 times negative 3 is going to be positive. And then 8 times 3 is 24. And then 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. Now I can add those 2 guys together in the parentheses. So I'm going to have x equals 4 plus or minus 16 plus 24, that is going to be 40 over 4. And then the next thing we're looking for is we want to figure out, well, what number times itself equals 40? Well, no number times itself equals 40. So what we're going to have to do instead is we're going to birthday cake this. Remember that? So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to birthday cake this 40 to simplify my square root. So prime that evenly goes into 40 is 2. 2 goes in 20 times. 2 goes into that 10 times. 2 goes into that 5 times. 5 goes into that once. So there's my pair. Okay, so I'm going to have a 2 on the outside, and then the 2 and 5 left over, we multiply back together. Okay, so I've got this like so. All right, and then there's actually one more step that we can do to simplify this. You're not going to have to deal with this a lot, but I want you to kind of see it. There is a way that you can simplify this like you'd simplify a fraction. But what you have to do is you have to look at all 3 of the numbers. They have to all be outside numbers, and there have to be 3 of them. And you want to see if there's anything that goes into all 3 of these numbers evenly. So like 2 does. 2 goes into all 3 of those evenly. Okay, and again, it's got to be the outside numbers. The 10 doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to divide all of those outside numbers by 2 and make it 2 plus or minus 1 times the square root of 10. You don't need to put the 1 there. Over 2. Okay, and then that's actually it. That's as much as this is going to simplify. So that is going to be the answers for this problem. Okay, and if you think about, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, how is that going to give me my answer? Okay, what your answer is going to be is it's going to end up being some decimals. If I were to take my calculator and I put this in there, so I would do 2 plus the square root of 10 and then divide that by 2. So it's about 2.58 is one answer. And the other one's going to be 2 minus the square root of 10 divided by 2. So that's about negative 0.58. So this 2.58 and the negative 0.581, those are going to be my 2 solutions to this guy. Okay, but you don't have to put it in your calculator. You can just leave it like this. All right, one more example. Let's look at this guy down here. Okay, so same thing. I'm going to start by figuring out what are A, B, and C. So in this case, there's an invisible 1 here, right? So A is 1, B is negative 4, and C is 25. Okay, so I'm plugging this into my equation. So it's x equals the opposite of B, so that's going to be a positive 4, plus or minus square root of B squared, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 25. Sorry, I'm kind of running out of room. Over 2 times 1. Okay, so again, 3 things that I do all in the same step. Oops, just realized I forgot to write squared there. That's important. Okay, so I'm going to square this guy. I'm going to multiply these guys. I'm going to multiply those guys. Okay, now I'm going to have 4 plus or minus negative 4 squared is 16. And then negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 25 is negative 100. All over 2. Okay, and then I'm going to subtract those 2 numbers, and now we're going to have something interesting happen. So 4 plus or minus 16 minus 100 is negative 84. And that's a problem. Okay, so try to think about for a second, why is that a problem that we got a negative 84? Well, you can't take square roots of negatives. That's not a thing. If I go on my calculator and I try to get it to tell me what the square root of negative 84 is, it tells me it's a non-real answer. I get an error, okay? Because you can't take square roots of negatives. So whenever this happens, whenever you end up with a square root of a negative number, that tells you that there is no solution to this problem, okay? So what that's telling me when it asks for a square root of a negative is it's telling me, oh, well, you know what? If you look at the graph of this graph looks like this. It doesn't ever cross the x-axis. And the way that shows up in the equation is that you're going to end up with a square root of a negative. Okay, this guy crossed the x-axis twice. So did this guy. We had some decimal answers, but it crossed twice. Okay, this guy, he didn't cross at all. And we know that because of the negative. Okay, so it's no solution. And again, the reason that we know that is because, So BC stands for because there is a negative in the square root. Okay, so that's going to be your cue that there'll be no solutions. All right, so again, this is a method that will always work. You could always use this to solve. Okay, this guy, we could have solved this by factoring, and it probably would have been a lot easier. This guy we couldn't solve by factoring, so quadratic formula is really your only option for this guy. Okay, and then this guy down here, also he wouldn't factor, right? Two things that multiply to 25 and add to -4, there aren't any. So quadratic formula is your only option for here too. If you can factor, factor is usually faster. Okay, but if you can't, this is a method that will always work.